Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I am the Associate Dean of the University Honors College. It's also my pleasure to organize this lecture series each semester, and I'm happy to have the series this semester focused on the topic of letters. Our speaker for today is someone who is no stranger to the Honors College. In fact, he spoke at a previous lecture series on citizenship, immigration, and refugees back in 2016, and spoke on, what was it? I think I wrote this down. Exodus from Vietnam, Surviving Katrina, and the Oil Spill. And that was a very, very good talk, and he did so well that I wanted to have him back.
And I did the veterans in 2015.
And you did yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So not once, not twice, but 3 times. So that says something. And if you're interested in any of that, which you should be after his talk today, please visit our website. You could just Google MTSU Honors Lecture Series, and it'll pop up, and you can go and see our past series, at least for the past however many years, 3 or 4 years, we've been posting all of those. So anyway, check it out. Our speaker today, of course, is Dr. Kyriakoudes. He's professor of history, and he is the director of the Albert Gore Research Center here at MTSU. He did his undergraduate degree in history at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his MA and PhD in history at my alma mater, Vanderbilt University. He has served as a National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development postdoctoral fellow at UNC's Population Center and has won grants from the Economic History Association, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the National Endowment for the Humanities for his research. Professor Kyriakoudes specializes in the social and economic history of the 19th and 20th century United States in a global context. And his research concerns the economic, demographic, and cultural history of the American South and the history of the global cigarette industry. 2 of his recent publications include books, Southern Society and its Transformations, 1790 to 1860, published by University of Missouri Press in 2011, and The Social Origins of the Urban South, Race, Gender, and Migration in Nashville and Middle Tennessee, 1890 to 1930, by the University of North Carolina Press in 2003. I mentioned that he's spoken to us previously, and he's added an additional one, so this will be his 3rd time speaking today. I was also very excited to have him here this semester because he is very graciously partnering with us this semester in this series. The Gore Center will be our destination next week, and so we'll see Professor Kyriakoudes this time next week in the Albert Gore Center. So our class is going to meet there. And I'm very grateful to him for his willingness not only to speak today, but to be our partner and to welcome us to the Gore Center and introduce us to what a research archive is and what its possibilities are. So his talk today is a product of that. He's going to be speaking on the topic of understanding how Tennesseans experience war through the letters of the Albert Gore Center. So please join me in welcoming Professor Kyriakoudes. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to be invited a 3rd time to speak, and so I'm hoping, 3rd time's a charm and I'll finally get it right. Well, yes, so we're going to talk about letters today, and let me ask you, you guys out, get a little discussion before I begin discussing what I've brought. Has anybody here actually written a traditional letter that they had to put in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and send it? A personal letter to somebody that they know or have a relationship with, as a friend or whatever. Raise your hand if you have. That's quite a few. How many of these were maybe occasioned by Christmas or a holiday or a birthday or so, a special occasion? Yeah. How many have just written one because they just want to send a letter to somebody? Cool, yeah. Why did you choose to send, we have so many ways to communicate with people. How many texts did you get today? If you got more than 10 texts today, raise your hand. Yeah. More than 20? 30? 40? Yeah. Okay, so, right. Just one of you. Why did you choose to send a handwritten or a written letter? You know, a traditional letter written on paper and sent to the post. Somebody just volunteer and tell us. Yes.
I had a friend from high school who joined the Army, and they were in training at a camp in Missouri, and they don't have access to their phones, so we wrote letters back and forth so that we could still communicate.
So you have to use that method. You have to go old school, so to speak. Oh, cool. Anybody else? Just a reason? Yes?
It's more personable than any other type of communication that we just have in our hands. Like we can walk and text, but to write a letter you have to be sitting down and focus and divide time into your day to...
Yeah, has more impact, more thought. Yes?
When I was younger, my grandmother didn't have a computer, so we used to write letters back and forth.
Very nice, yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I used to help someone convert cassettes to MP3 for whatever reason, and we used to send them from, I don't know where we stayed at, but then it became from that, and then we just started corresponding more and more through the actual packages we were sending. We just write letters.
Right, so you would send a cassette?
Yeah, or he would send them to me, because I used to work at a music studio, so.
Yeah, right, okay, and you would have, okay, that's cool. Yes?
My cousin and I grew up 3 states apart, but we were always really close, and it was before she had a cell phone. So I would send her letters, and sometimes she would send me a CD or something back in the mail.
Yeah, right, very nice. You know, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about ways of one of the ways of communication in World War II, but your mentioning of a cassette, so the other person would record a narration, a message to you in cassette, and then send that to you. In the 1940s, you used to actually go to a service where you would speak into a recorder, and they would cut a small phonograph record into a kind of hard wax, and then you could send that phonograph record to somebody and hear their voice. You only had about a minute of time, but so some of these technologies, which we think are very, very new, actually have some predecessors, and I'm going to give another example of that, kind of the email of the 1940s as we get into it. Well, this is exciting, and I'm actually thrilled that people are sending traditional letters. I today received a traditional letter from one of the people that I work with at the Gore Center, who's in Washington, one of our supporters. He could have sent an email. Instead, he sent a letter with a little clipping to read this. And I've gotten more and more in the habit, I have to say, of sending regular letters too when I want to have an impact. When I think, if I just send an email, it's probably just going to get not even maybe read carefully or deleted. But if I send this person a regular letter, I just wanted, we're in such a transition in terms of how we communicate with people at a distance. We have so many options, we can actually choose the ones that we want. So folks in the 1940s, during World War II, on the other hand, let's see if I can do this, pretty much had one option, and they had traditional mail. And of course, people have been writing letters and sending those letters through the postal system as long as there has been affordable paper, easy to manipulate writing instruments, and postal systems, which actually date to early modern Great Britain. They were the first to develop postal systems. To go back before that, things were a little bit more complicated. Mail, though, is also a strategic component of war. And World War II illustrates that. And here are 2 World War II era posters pointing to the importance of mail. So the United States enters World War II after the December 7th, 1941 invasion or attack on Pearl Harbor. And we mobilize very quickly for what is a 2-front war in Europe and in the Pacific. And it is a national conflict. That is, everything in the society begins quickly to turn towards the war effort. If it wasn't necessary for maintaining the domestic economy and promoting the war effort, it was put on the back burner if it was an economic activity or a social cultural activity. And so in a way that might be hard for us to understand today, because for most of you, we've been at war before you were even born. That is the war in Afghanistan, our longest war. And for those of you who know people who are in military service and may have been stationed in Afghanistan, families, friends, parents perhaps, that war is a reality. But for a lot of us, it involves no sacrifice. At this time, though, it did involve sacrifice because it was such an existential conflict that involved so much of our national resources and effort. And mail was identified from the beginning as a strategic component of the war effort. Why? Well, war is fought by men at this time, well, men and women, in military service. I misspoke there. There were women in service in World War II in the front as well, although not to the gender-integrated component that we have today. And mail was identified as a way to maintain morale. So you said that you send letters to a friend who's in basic training. Is that really? Right. And is he grateful? Is it a he?
Yeah.
And he's grateful to receive those letters?
Yeah.
And when he writes you back, you're grateful to hear from him?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a way of maintaining communication. Yeah. You take that basic principle and you write it large upon the society. And then as a national wartime priority, you think of ways to promote this. And what did the federal government do? The United States military and the war effort, they developed a high-tech system for mail called V-mail, V for victory, and you've got to get people to write letters. How many times have we thought, oh, I should write a letter, but I'm busy, and particularly during the war, people really are busy. Women enter the workforce. Ones that don't enter military service, they go into the workforce and work in factories. Here in Nashville, there was a huge Vultee aircraft factory out by the airport. The building is still there. And women worked building all kinds of military aircraft as riveters and other high-tech, for the day, high-tech assemblers of this kind of equipment. So people are very busy. They're very stressed. You have to run a persuasion campaign to persuade people to write letters. I'll explain what V-mail is in a minute, but right here, you write, he'll fight, and the other one, can you pass a mailbox with a clear conscience? Kind of shaming people. Write letters, get these letters out. V-mail stationery, only 10 cents, 25 cents, or 50 cents, depending upon the type of package that you send. I can tell you what V-mail is. V-mail was this high-tech solution to the problem of, boy, that we've got a lot of mail. We have, millions of men in service overseas. We have a country of about 150 million people at home. Those letters add up. How do we get the mail overseas? There's no email. There's no electronic communication. They're not sending it over the wires.
From home. Each day, millions of them are sent to American servicemen fighting on distant battlefronts. Because of a war postal system called V-mail, they can be flown throughout the world, reaching distant points safely and with amazing speed. This plane is landing in Italy. Each bag of mail it carries contains 136,000 letters. Back in America, each letter was reduced to a tiny strip of film. Near the front, automatic machines enlarge each overseas letter from 16mm motion picture negative to a 4x5-inch print. These strips are dried, carefully inspected, and cut into individual letters. Machines fold them and put them into envelopes. In this one laboratory, over 300,000 letters a day are handled. A complete locator card system takes care of mail incorrectly addressed. In the censorship section, anything that might reveal vital military information is cut out. At mail call, Americans overseas receive their letters. Nearly every transport plane that spans the ocean brings its quota of mail. In just a few days, V-mail letters from home reach servicemen in every theater of war.
This high-tech system, they actually took pictures of each letter and put it on movie film, 16 millimeter movie film. That's the same, well, you don't remember movies in your school, but you know, the old school films, about that thick, and wrap those, send those reels, and that's why a bag that was about this big could hold, as he said, about 130 some odd thousand letters. A very complex, very labor-intensive system that was put in place because otherwise there was not enough airplane capacity to move these letters to the front. And if they'd been put on ships, you know, then that's months. And so the idea was we have to have instant communication between family members and friends and soldiers on the front, and back and forth, as a way to maintain morale. And here's more examples of the ways in which letter writing was promoted. The two previous posters were U.S. government posters, but this is an Emerson Electric advertisement, a corporate advertisement telling, oh, you're never too busy to write V-mail. And of course, this woman here is writing a letter with her right hand. She's rocking the baby with her right foot, and she seems to be stirring something for dinner. Perhaps she's making a cake or biscuits with her left hand, and she's smiling. So, yeah, pretty good. And that's a good point, in high heels. What must be the most uncomfortable thing to put on your feet in the world. And then here's another example, the other end. Here's what looks like a soldier, I would guess the Pacific, just based on the flora in the background, and in a plane there, unloading the supplies, which include, you know, the mail, the bundled mail. The next best thing to leave is a letter. And then that, again, is this is being promoted by the Martin Aircraft Corporation, which at that time was busy making, you know, military aircrafts. I won't play this. This will be on the website, but there was even on the radio public service announcements or news spots explaining how to write a letter. Keep in mind, you know, literacy is a thing that not everybody would have possessed in the 1940s, at least not possessed to the degree where they would have felt comfortable writing a letter. And so there was these instructional resources. And so what this says, I won't play it, we don't have time, but you know, if you're going to write a letter, write about what's happening in your community. Be sure to say positive things. You know, small details are actually very good examples of good writing generally. But you know, this was part of the effort to persuade people to write the letters. So, what do those letters look like? Well, that's going to be the second part of my discussion. And we're going to look at these letters together, and some of them have been transcribed and are real easy to read. Some of them haven't. A little bit more difficult to read, but I want you to all go through them. I've brought examples from two collections. We have many collections at the Gore Center that document the home front during World War II, and we have many different collections of letters, too numerous really, probably about 18 or so, dozen and a half. But I'm going to focus on two that are fascinating to me and are a little bit intertwined and interconnected. The first is Adeline King. Adeline King was a woman who lived in Smyrna. She was from a prosperous, important family in that part of Rutherford County. And during World War II, she was a war worker. She worked at Stewart Air Force Base, which is now the airport in Rutherford County, but at the time was an important military base for the U.S. Army Air Corps, and she had a job there. And actually in December of 1943, Adeline King, you know, had been writing letters to so many of the servicemen from her community that she hit upon the idea of just putting together a newsletter. And so she said, well, you know, I could write a bunch of individual letters, but let me start by writing a newsletter. This is a picture of Ms. King in the 1940s. And she started typing and then mimeographing these letters, which would be reduced, as far as we could tell, into the V-mail format and sent out. And then she would keep a copy, and we have transcribed those copies. By the end of the war, she had about 125 correspondents. Yes?
What is that mimeographic referring to?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes. So mimeograph is a form of reproduction of texts, kind of like photocopies, but before you had the xerographic system. And so you would type your document onto a special kind of paper. You would put it on this drum, and the drum would have a kind of ink material in it, a kind of I believe it's an acetone-based ink. And you would have your master on a special piece of paper, and then you would have your paper, and you would turn it manually, and it would feed the blank paper. The blank paper would turn around the drum and be imprinted with the text. And so even I, starting out my teaching career in 1990, had to submit my midterm exams to the secretary, who would transfer it to the mimeograph master, and she would mimeograph because in 1990 it was too expensive to simply go and photocopy something for a test for a class of like 75 students. Do you remember, did you ever have to use mimeograph or dittos?
I remember mimeographs, but it's more from when I was in elementary school and middle school, and when you would get the sheets, it would be slightly damp. Yeah, and people like to sniff the sheets.
Yeah, there's a famous scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Yeah, where that happens. But yeah, y'all won't. That's the acetone, I think, is what the.
Right, you can smell. Yeah, but that dampness in the paper.
Yeah. So that's exactly what she would do, and then she would send these out. And again, it's we think of social media as being something new, and one of the themes of my talk is, well, this stuff's not really all that new, at least the forms of it and the way we implement it and the way that we organize it. And so by sending out a newsletter that's addressed in first person and informal language, we're going to look at some of the examples. 225 people, that's not unlike, sending something out on a Facebook feed or some other social media feed to your 125 friends that are in your closed group and letting them know what's going on, right? And so there's Ms. King. This is an example. This is actually the first one. And we could just take a minute to look at this. These are transcribed for ease of reading. And just take a minute to read this. And I'd like to have you tell me what you think of it. What's going on in this little excerpt? This is just a brief excerpt from the newsletter. What's going on in the neighborhood, right? Some families are being discussed. At this time, she only has a few people that she's sending it to. This is actually the very first one of the so-called newsletters, and she had about a dozen soldiers that she was sending it to. What is the reference to the star turning to gold reference? If you're a Gold Star parent of a serviceman, what does that mean? In service. That's correct. Yeah. Gold Star father, Gold Star mother. So here, the Neelys they're in mourning. They're having a difficult time. And, they've met at the church. Another family, the Quinns, are with them. This all would have been known to the people reading the letter. These were families that were familiar to them. There's a little bit of a kind of a humorous part to it at the end. There's one lady is angry. One of the family members is angry, mighty mad at the government because it didn't let the father stay here until December 26th. So people are mustered out, right away. Of course, goodbyes are always difficult in an uncertain situation. Very powerful. We have these at the Gore Center, and if you are in a class where you have to write a research paper on World War II in the home front, or families, or faith, or the role of religious institutions in people's daily life, or anything like that, these Adeline King newsletters are amazing. And in fact, I'm forgetting the name of the faculty. There was an English professor here in the 1980s, I've been told, who would read these in dramatic fashion, a woman faculty member on the radio, as just part of the WMOT or whatever the Middle Tennessee radio programs were. I've names in my notes. Here's another one. This is, what's the date of this one? What would be significant about that date, or roughly that week and a half or so? You know anything about World War II? D-Day, you saw who's seen Saving Private Ryan, which is the most recent film about that. A very moving and powerful and disturbing film. Just take a look at this one. Let's see what's going on in this letter. These are difficult events, aren't they? What's going on? What's the first tragedy that she describes? Yeah, and an accident on the farm. He was messing with the combine, which is a harvesting machine. That could have been we don't know if it was a hay, corn, or wheat combine. All three are major crops in this area at the time. But you know, it's got a device to cut the crop that you're harvesting, to run it through a machine, and then to bind it or separate it. Hence the term combine involves both the cutting of the crop, the harvest, and some minimal preparation. Yeah. We get a little bit, you know, if you're interested in the history of medicine, there's a little bit of a reference there to groundbreaking technology, medical technology. What's the medicine he's treated with? Yeah. How many people have had an ear infection and have had to take an antibiotic? Yeah. How many people know of somebody, I'm not trying to get you medical, know of someone who maybe has had a more severe infection in which they had to be treated with powerful antibiotics to save their life? You know, maybe you know, something after, you don't have to imagine a world where there were no antibiotics, which was the world really before 1940. You know, which meant that if you had an ear infection as a kid, well, it might resolve itself, or it might not. You might go deaf. Yeah, this is before most modern vaccines as well. So you know, the idea that you could go to the doctor and get treatment that will result in you getting better, that's a very recent experience for humankind. The typical situation was you didn't get better. You know, the doctor's therapeutic interaction had limited efficacy. How's that for fancy language? Until well into the 20th century. You know, well into the 20th century. And then here, you know, an accident, plane crashes, you know, from the Smyrna Air Force base. You know, it burns down a home, hits another one. A woman goes, you know, is somehow, you know, injured and delivers a premature child. You know, that doesn't survive. We don't know the actual situation there, but you know, if anyone's been to the neonatal intensive care unit at any modern hospital, sometimes called NICU, some of you may have had this experience in your family or community history. You know that remarkable things happen today, keeping premature babies alive and on a path to being healthy children. And you know, this is not a case in 1944. You know, many of you may have grandparents that, you know, were born before then, or great-grandparents. So not that long ago. This is my last example of the Smyrna bulletins, and you see here she started numbering them, you know, and she got more formalized as the number of recipients grew over time. And this is from a few months later, November. That's a mistype, 1994. That is not correct. It should be 1944. I'm glad I caught that. That's a transcription error. I just now saw that, but take a look here. This one's pretty. But here's this woman in Smyrna. You think of this as a network. We're familiar with network connections. We live in a networked world today. She's writing. She's a central node of information, and she's delivering information about somebody in New Guinea, that is in the Pacific, not far from Australia, and where a site of very important fighting in the Pacific campaign. Then there's Robert Adkerson, who's in France, and so she's connected to him and sharing information about what's happening in the French theater of war. And in November of 1944, France has been retaken, but now the drive into Belgium and Germany has begun, and things bogged down. Just if you know World War II history, you know this. If you don't, I'm telling you. Things bog down and get quite slow, and the Germans put up one last kind of powerful push against the Allies, which culminates in something called the Battle of the Bulge, which is in December of 1944. So this is November, and here it's the effort to break into Belgium, to break into Germany through that way. And then the fourth person is in India, which was another area of conflict. The Japanese controlled all of Southeast Asia, and so there was also a movement to remove the Japanese from Burma and French Indochina, what we would call today Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and that region. And again, so we have essentially from all over the world, all information coming in. She's reading the letters of other people in the community. People are sending her letters. She's talking to people in the community. She's taking that information, and then she's sending it back out to her correspondents in 1944. It's slow. It requires the physical movement of the mail, as we saw in the film, the World War II era newsreel, but it's still a network connection, and she is a node of information, and I find that fascinating. So it's not just what she says, but the connections and how she says it and the information she's giving forward. Another really important collection that we have, and we've only just acquired this in the last couple of years, are the Moore-Williamson family letters. And this is part of a much larger collection of material. And this is an example of two things. One, we're going to look at some V-mail, and this is traditional correspondence. And we'll try to read some of this. This is handwriting, it's not transcribed. And I'll help you through some of these letters. It's also a study, though, in how things get preserved. Now, next week you're going to come to the Gore Center and actually see the archive. And we have boxes with papers in it. And some boxes have videos. And then we have some computer servers that have digitized materials. But basically, we're a storehouse for texts, different kinds of texts. Video text, audio text, printed texts, digital text, but we're a storehouse for texts. Okay, and most of that's preserving words, language. So we get your postmodern in right now. Your postmodern theory, that is. How stuff ends up at the Gore Center, and for that matter, any archive, sometimes it can be quite complex, but almost always is the result of serendipity. Sometimes just outright chance. And whether something is preserved or thrown away or burnt in a fire, house fire, courthouse fire, what have you, is really just kind of luck, just pure luck. So these letters came to us. A family that owned a farm called Moore Farm. It's Moore-Williamson because there's a couple of families involved, but it's known as Moore Farm, and it's in the southern part of Davidson County, kind of Cane Ridge area, kind of near Nolensville. Now heavily suburbanized and prosperous, and part of this kind of growing Nashville, Davidson County, Williamson County, Rutherford County economic engine that we all live in today, but in 1944 was way out in the country, way out in the country. This letter is July 28, 1944. Well, that farm has been transferred to Davidson County, and the goal is to make that into a new park for that part of the county that isn't served by parks. And here's the house. And inside the house are these documents. And the historic preservation people from our own university, because we are leaders in that, the Center for Historic Preservation, their student workers and staff people are going through the house. The family doesn't live in the house anymore. There are a couple of elderly survivors who live in nursing homes, and they find all these documents. And nobody knew the documents were in there. The documents were sitting in a box up in the attic, and that house is slated for either demolition, and they're not sure they're trying to save the house because it is kind of historically significant, but it could be demolished. And so one of the student workers, a graduate student here at MTSU, calls the Gore Center and says, would you be interested in these? And we say yes. And so they come to us in a box, and I'll show you the box next week when you come to visit us. And the letters are all folded up in the box in their envelopes. We took the time to digitize them because they're very fragile. And so things end up in archives sometimes just because, just dumb luck. And then sometimes people don't keep things. They throw things away, or there's a fire, what have you, or they don't think it's worth anything. Someone passes away and they go through his effects or her effects, and that person may have had a very interesting career, or done all kinds of stuff, or had a relationship with somebody in the military, as in this case of these letters that I'm going to show you. And, we got to clean this house up. We want to sell it or tear it down, or we're going to strip out the good wood, and off into the trash the things go. So here's an example, and what's kind of sweet about these letters is Malcolm Williamson and Eileen Moore, they do get married. They get married in 1945 after the war is over, but he's still in military service. But this is 1944, and so Eileen Moore and he are betrothed. They're engaged to be married. They're dearly close. And the letters are very sweet. And so it says, "My darling, finally, the ice broke today, and I received some mail from you. Leave to the extent," and he's basically saying he's gotten letters from the 16th, 17th, and 18th. So she's written him 3 letters in as many days and sent them off. And he's actually still in the United States. That's why this is a paper letter. He's in training up at a base, and it's somewhere, it's unclear where he is. It's probably New York. And he's getting these letters from her, and he's writing back, saying how delighted he was. And then they go in and they talk about some personal things, and he says what's going on in his daily life. It comes to be, and this is the 3rd page of the letter, just so that you know, and here is, "All my love, Malcolm." And these letters they're quite sweet. He's sent overseas. And so this is the V-mail. V-mail here. The original looks like a little photograph, just like we saw. It's a photograph. Because what they do, as we saw in the film strip, is they're just, in the newsreel, is they're just developing things. And you saw there was a lady there cutting them kind of real quick on a specialized cutter. It's a photograph. And here he's not supposed to say where he is, but he's in Italy, and he does say where he is. And one of the interesting things about these letters is his propensity, we think, is to give more information than he should have, at least according to what the rules were at the time. And we don't know how many of his letters were censored or, 86'd. They would tend to black out the things that were wrong, and we haven't seen anything blacked out. And there are a lot of letters. I've only got a few that I'm going to share with you. These people are writing every day. But you can see right here, it says, "Miss Eileen Moore, Antioch, Tennessee." That's in southern Davidson County. And he's writing his letter. And this is July 16th, 1944. And he's just describing kind of his day-to-day stuff about what has been happening. She corresponded with other people as well, friends from the community. And this one is interesting here, to Ms. Eileen Moore, of course. This is from Malcolm Williamson, who will be her, they will soon get married. Effective immediately and until further notice, please do not, and any more mail to me at the address given below. I will advise you promptly when mail should be resumed and will give you my proper address. I cannot do so now for military, basically reasons. Do not write in this space. And what's going on is, they're moving quickly. He's going into battle. He's actually in Italy. And what's going on in Italy in 1944, they've invaded Italy the year before near Naples in what was a precursor to D-Day, a place called Anzio. They also landed troops from Sicily to the southern part of Italy, and they're driving up through Italy. And just so that you know the context, Italy was led by a fascist sympathizer, an ally of Hitler named Mussolini, Benito Mussolini. But then Mussolini's overthrown and a new government comes in. But the German soldiers are still there, so in essence they declare war on Italy, occupy Italy, and try to prevent or hold Italy as much as possible because that was another way to get to Germany. And so there's a lot. My point is not all the fighting is going on in France in the drive that way to Germany. There's a lot of very important military activity going on in Italy as well. And this is an example of where this is he can't talk to her for a while. What do you think? If you had gotten this, if you'd been getting letters all the time from him, it's like 100 and some odd letters. In terms of pages, it's 700 individual document pages. I haven't actually counted up the number of letters. And then you get this: I can't write you. You can't write me. That's not a happy thing, right? That's a nail-biting stress event, I would think, for both of them, but especially for Ms. Moore. They're not yet married. They will be married later. This is another one. This is to Billy Moore. I believe that's her brother. And this is just kind of a standard. They have these standard things. Merry Christmas. It's from Malcolm Williamson, but now it says somewhere in France. So he's been transferred, he's been moved. Maybe that was what was behind this. We don't really know. For sure, we have to piece that together. And I've not studied these letters. I've kind of read them for this presentation. We have so much material in the Gore Center. There's not enough hours in the day or days in the year for me to know all of that material from a direct researcher perspective. But you guys can make your own discoveries in your own research papers. Here's another example. This is from a guy named Jack Lehman, I believe is his name. And he's writing Ms. Eileen Moore. He's a friend of hers. And this one right here. Through Adeline King's letter, I learned that Malcolm was fortunate enough to be the only survivor in his outfit. So we have Adeline King's newsletter going out to her web of soldiers who are all from this area of Smyrna, northern Rutherford County, southern Davidson County. It's all kind of the community. And the information is coming back. And it's pretty clear to me that what's going on here is Ms. Moore has not heard from Malcolm Williamson in quite some time. And so she's writing to everybody she knows. We don't have all the correspondence. We don't have the letters that Malcolm received. Where did those go? They may have been lost as he was returning to the mill. In this battle might have been where his materials were lost or destroyed. You can't, when you're fighting in intense conflict, you don't always have the luxury of keeping these things with you. But, she's written, he hears, he gives her some information, and this is to give you, he's happy to tell her with some joy. But, if you read behind that text, and the only guy to survive, well, it's great that he's alive, but all the other people didn't. And what kind of experience did he go through? We don't know for sure. You want to do the research on this, You can get his service record for the National Archives, which will be public information because of the great amount of time that's passed. It's no longer personal, protected information. And you could recreate that story. That would be, when you come to graduate school, get an MA or have that senior. Do they write senior theses in this class? Do you guys write a senior thesis? Substantial paper?
Yes.
Part of my job is to give topics out, like candy at Christmas, at Halloween. So that's an example of one. I'm only got like a minute left. And here's another one. This is from a guy named F.S. Thomas, and it's typed, which is interesting, again to Ms. Moore. And he's trying to type on a German typewriter. The keys are all messed up. If this letter does not make sense, do not blame me altogether. And he says right here, "It is very hard to get in my head that the war is over." So this is May 29th, 1945. Actually, the war is not over because they're still fighting in the Pacific Theater. But Germany, May 8th, they're done. That's, if you've seen The Last Days or that German language version of The Last Days of Hitler or any of these films, or perhaps you even read a book about it. And he's just describing what Germany is like. He's in this place, the war is over, things are pacified. He's in Munich, and he's just telling her what's going on. Remarkable first-person account of the end of World War II. So that's what letters can do. And these particular wartime letters not only preserve the story of World War II, but they were in an historical context where these letters were very important to the people writing them, to the people receiving them, and to the government that was prosecuting this global conflict and assisted in promoting and delivering these letters. Any questions? It's kind of fun to sit down and actually take the time to read these. I've enjoyed it preparing for this talk. Yes, sir. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I just said yes, sir, reflexively.
Do you ever feel uncomfortable going through these letters with the level of intimacy that might be between people who've been apart for so long? Just like you're seeing such private thoughts between two people who obviously have very deep feelings for each other.
It's a little bit like going through somebody's sock drawer. That's the drawer that you keep kind of all your secret things, or at least in my family, that's. Y'all might have, on one sense, yes, it is. It's delving into the most intimate and private parts of a relationship. And sometimes you read things that are very painful, but you also read things that are very joyful. I don't feel uncomfortable anymore because the family donated these letters to us. They want them preserved. They want these stories preserved. And to me, they are the evidence of, or the various datums, the data of human experience that we can build really interesting stories. And I think it's important to remember these stories. Not every story is, happens at the level of a president getting elected or a congressman or a general. Some of the most moving, important, and meaningful stories happen at this level of human experience, which is the most fundamental nature of our relationships.
Yes, sir. I have two questions. I'm not sure if they relate, but the first is you mentioned that most of the letters all letters were getting read if they were getting sent out.
Yeah, the stuff on this, they had a censor. We saw that censor guy reading those.
Yeah. Was anything ever changed? Do we know? Was there any, an instance of that? And then also, too, would the Axis powers have been interested in intercepting this type of communication just to maybe get a sense of the morale?
Sure, right, yeah, that's an interesting point. The first question I can give a definitive answer. The way the censors worked is they had basically a thick marker type of, it would just be blocked out. And so you would get the letter, and there just would be things that would obscure the text. And it was just black. I think they used a kind of marker type system.
Okay, so just simple, just redact it.
Yeah, right, exactly. But the other question, that's an interesting one, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think you could look it up and investigate. Did the Japanese and German and Italian intelligence services see a value in this kind of mail? I suspect the answer is yes. Why would you have sensors? Because sensors would, a lot of what sensors would take out was location information or any description of battles where someone might actually know how things were going, or descriptions of like, you know, we have plenty of food or we don't have enough food, or I'm running out of ammunition. I'm not run into that. But yeah, so I mean, it seems to me that the answer would be yes, and that might be an interesting story if the records have been preserved. You know, what kinds of questions was the enemy asking of the day-to-day mail of soldiers? Yeah, that's a pretty good question. Anybody else have a question? There's others.
I think that brings us to our end. Thank
Yeah?
you so much.
This was fun.